it is my honor and privilege to introduce the writer and director of The Farewell, Lulu Wang.
Thank you for being here. Incredible film.
Thank you.
So I don't know if I'm allowed to, I guess, reveal this to a room full of many strangers, but
Just go closer. We're all friends here.
But this story actually did occur in my family as well. And when I was listening to my mom talk about it, I was like, wow, that is really messed up. And then you see this film, and then you read more, and you're like, oh, well, this is actually a pretty common occurrence. So have you noticed, like, throughout promoting the film, have you noticed, like, people, like, with that same story coming up to you and telling you that?
Yeah, so I did a This American Life story first, and even when that aired, people would come up to me at parties and be like, if like what they found out, and they would be like, oh my God, I heard that story, this is crazy, and this and this happened to my family. And at first it was like, you know, I sort of expected that there would be other Chinese people and other Asian people, but there were people that were like Middle Eastern or from like South America that were doing it, and that's what was really surprising, was just how widespread this practice is.
So you did mention this was a podcast episode on This American Life. So I was just wondering if you could talk about the process of recording that and how that turned into this movie.
So I had wanted to do this as a film from the beginning, but nobody wanted to finance it, and nobody wanted to do it, especially like the way that I wanted to make it, like this. And so I just set it aside, and I did a This American Life, where, you know, the approach was so different. Like, the producers there were like, that's so crazy that this happened, tell us more, and how did that make you feel? And like, no one in Hollywood, if you go into a pitch meeting, goes, that's crazy, now tell me, how did that make you feel? Like, let's explore that, you know? It's usually like, that's awesome, well, we should cast this person, does that person really have to be Asian? And, you know, can we change the language, and can we do this and that? And so it was just such a different experience approaching it from an investigative perspective, like with curiosity. And we started interviewing my family and looking through footage that I had shot and pulling like audio clips, and it all made it feel so much more real and like atmospheric. So then, as soon as the episode aired, all these producers called wanting to make it into a film. And then I was able to kind of select which producer I wanted to work with, who was going to stay authentic to how I wanted to tell the story.
Was there anything that, like, during that process that you had to compromise on in order to get this made? Because obviously a movie, while reflecting real life, may not necessarily be exactly what it was. Or would you say that you were able to tell, like, the exact story you wanted to tell?
I would say it was pretty close. I mean, I don't think that any of the important things, the things that were important to me, I didn't compromise on. You know, do I wish I had more time? Would I have done more things? Like, always, that's the nature of film, as opposed to radio. You don't need as many resources, so you can really just craft it. But that's also part of the magic of it. Like, so many things came out different but better than I had even hoped, and so much of the casting happened very last minute, because there were so many people to cast, and we cast it all locally, and I didn't have time to meet everyone. And so for them to have such an organic chemistry when you have like 13 people on screen, that's just magic. That's not something that I could even control.
So in terms of casting, in case you guys did not know, Little Nai Nai in the film is played by the real Little Nai Nai. And if you could just talk about how that specifically worked and how casting in general for this film was.
First of all, we cast Awkwafina. She was the first one we cast because we couldn't greenlight the project without that character, and it's such a difficult role to cast because she has to be bilingual, but she has to really feel American. And after she was cast, I think the next one was, Time Off for Dad was a pretty obvious one for me. And then we went to China and cast all the other roles with a local casting director. We cast Nai Nai. We went through parks, our casting team to like, they went to like local parks to cast both the grandmas. They were like grabbing people and just like putting them on camera. And so that's why I was like, well, if we're going to look for non-actors at this point, because we couldn't afford any of the really big actors, they were all working. And as an American production, you don't realize the value of Chinese actors because you don't know them. And you're like, well, how much can they possibly cost? But in China, they're very valuable because they're working all the time. And so so we underestimated that in the budget, and so we were looking in parks. And then I was like, we're going to look in parks, like there's no one cuter than little Nai Nai, like just let her play herself. And it took several auditions before I got her really comfortable. But she got so emotional during the final audition where I said, stop trying to act, like just talk about what happened. And she got so emotional that I showed the tapes to the producers, and they were like, well, yeah, she's amazing, but is it ethical to put her through this? I mean, it was so painful to see her crying on screen, and then so we had to sit her down and really ask her if it would be, if she felt okay doing it. And she said it was really therapeutic. So I had to trust her that she meant that. And then, we have a lot of other family members that we were just, trying to pull left and right. And I'm going to embarrass her for a second, but my real Gugu, my real aunt, Gugu Gufu, are here from China. They're seeing the movie for the first time. And we found an actress to play Gugu, and it was very important that she was beautiful and kind. But I think we all agreed that the actress is not as beautiful as my real Gugu was.
So you mentioned it being therapeutic for her, so I imagine it must have been for you as well. So like, what was it like to direct basically a version of your own life? Like, was it easier? Was it harder? Like, what went into that? And what did you get out of it?
I think it was like easier in some ways because I knew the character so well, and I knew what it felt like to capture both the joy and the pathos. I think what was really challenging was trying to figure out where my loyalty, my responsibility lay, if it was with the film or towards my family. And sometimes those two things don't meet up. In order to be loyal, responsible to the film, I might show somebody in a light that they might not appreciate, but it might be truthful, and so I still have a lot of family members who haven't seen it, and I don't know, like, if my uncle or my cousin sees it, if they're gonna, like, feel okay about being exposed in that way, or how they're represented. But so I tried to be respectful, but at the same time, I want it to be honest and, truthful. And it was also challenging just, well, I wouldn't say it was challenging. It was, like, complicated and beautiful to have my real Nai Nai, like, 2 blocks away, oftentimes, from where we were shooting, when we're trying to still keep this whole thing a secret from her. And then, we had to take her sister away from her caregiving responsibilities to go make this movie. So there was a lot of, like, decisions like that were just always more complicated than a production normally is, because I had to think about my family. And, like, real Nai Nai wanted us to use her apartment, and my DP, after scouting apartment after apartment, fell in love with her real apartment. And so I was like, oh my God, and my grandma was like, just take it, use it, I'll move out, I'll move to a hotel. And so that kind of started to go into motion, and then it got really complicated because we had to find the right apartment. Is it going to have an elevator? And, like, who's going to move with her? So finally I was like, I can't take this kind of responsibility and move this woman who has stage 4 lung cancer. And, like, if something happened during the production and she's in this hotel or rental, like, I'm going to feel guilty forever. And so as a family, we decided not to move her. And so there was a lot of stuff like that.
Have your parents seen the movie?
Yeah, my parents saw it at Sundance.
What did they think?
Well, my dad said, it's pretty good, to, like, the entire audience. Which is an Asian A+.
Yeah, so like because some of the scenes that resonated the most with me were like her and her mom, because of that like push and pull between like they want to support you and want what's best for you, but then there's also the just not understanding exactly what it is that you're doing or trying to pursue, and especially I think, especially in like the film industry, for instance. So like, what role like have your parents played throughout this process, and how important have they been to you, and have there been any struggles there in terms of your path in general?
Oh my gosh, endless struggle. I think what made it a little bit easier was I've made a first feature film, and so they were really surprised by that film in many ways because they just didn't think I could ever make a film, and so regardless of where the film went or how it did, for them to see the film on a big screen and we went to festivals with it, they were really impressed, and so from then on they became really supportive. But before that, it was always a lot of struggle with them, and it was more of a struggle not because they weren't supportive, but I could see and feel their fear and not being able to always support myself and needing to ask for help, or saying, well, I'm not going to ask for help because I don't want them to worry about me or have doubts about what I'm doing, and trying to maintain my pride so I don't ask for help. But then when I really do need help, that was always a challenge, and I didn't want them to worry. Or just have to rely on them. And then with this film, what was the biggest challenge was I wanted them to be involved because I wanted their input. It was, I think it was invaluable to have them read the script that was translated into Chinese, and they read the translation and was like, that doesn't sound like what it should sound like. That's not how the family talks. And they went through and made it more colloquial. We did countless versions of the Chinese dialogue because I don't read or write Chinese. So I speak Chinese, so I hear it in my head as Chinese, but I would write it in English, like translate it automatically and write it in English. But then we gave it to a translator who translated into a different Chinese than I heard in my head. But because I can't read Chinese, I couldn't read that draft. So I had to rely on somebody who both knew what I had in my head and could also read Chinese. And so they were invaluable with that. But of course, because it's such a personal story, they often felt like, especially my mother, because she's a writer, she would often be like, I don't think your perspective is right because you don't understand China, and there are some things that you really need to understand. And I had to say, no, the character doesn't understand. That's the point. That is the perspective of the movie. And she would be like, yeah, but you as the writer have to understand. And then she would go on a whole thing about the Cultural Revolution and communism, and it's like, that's not what the movie's about. So she would often interject like chunks of dialogue that once we got on set, someone would be like, this doesn't really flow, it doesn't really fit. And I was like, it's okay, my mother made me put it in. It kind of, like people could feel that it was from a different movie, And so then she saw the edit and she was like, you cut all the important stuff. And I don't know what your movie's about anymore. And so we had a bit of, but overall, I think they're really supportive.
I think the experience of being like stuck between two cultures is a really tough place to be, and it's a really interesting experience to navigate, like as you're becoming your own person, like as you're growing up. And I think this film portrays that so beautifully, and I think it does a lot of it visually. And I'm thinking about the scene when they're all around that table and they're eating seafood and it's just like spinning, and they have that conversation about China and states and just like the blocking and framing of certain shots. And I just wanted to know, like, what was your process in that? How did like your own experiences inform those choices about those specific scenes?
I feel like that version of that, like I've had that conversation with my family millions of times. Every time I go back to China, it's sort of this ongoing debate. But I wanted for the most part to make the film really visual, and so I had to be very selective with the scenes where there was dialogue. So yeah, I think that was an important dialogue scene, and then some of the scenes with the mom was really important in terms of just like not only cultural gap but generational gaps, and I think like every mother-daughter has this generational gap and has a complicated relationship as it is. Every parent fears what their child is gonna, if they're gonna succeed or not. But I think having this additional like pressure of like where you feel like your family sacrificed everything for you, and you somehow have to validate those sacrifices. But the whole point of doing art and trying to like pursue something that you love, which is kind of the reason they came to this country in the first place, the very nature of it involves failure. Like you can't be an artist without, just leaping and failing, and so I think that was always like for me the challenge is how do I like do this really daring thing, but then how do I not fail doing it, because I don't want to hurt my parents and be a letdown.
So how was then, like, obviously like, the authenticity of this entire story is really resonated, and a big part of that was being able to, I'm sure, shoot on location. So what was that process like, and how was your experience shooting in China?
It was great in so many ways because it was sort of like the Wild Wild West for the whole crew. We were, an American production shooting in China, and and dealing with the local crew. My DP was not Chinese; is from New York. My production designer's originally from Korea, but like lives in New York, lives in LA and went to AFI. So there was like levels of understanding, and my DP Spanish, lives in New York, but she had just by coincidence done another movie in China right before this. So she had, a couple crew people that she brought on. My producers had never been to China aside from our location scout. So it was just this very like crazy mix of people. And so in many ways you get away with a lot of stuff because no one really knows the rules and there are no unions over there. And so, I mean, we had SAG, so like the actors had to, but it was just sort of trying to just like make it work however you can. And what was crazy was like, first of all, like we did 6-day shooting weeks, and for them that was amazing. They were like, "Thank you for giving us a day off. Normally we do 7-day shooting weeks," and for us, we're like, "This is insane." But also, like, everybody there works so hard. It's a hierarchical system. And so nobody called me by my name. I'd walk onto set and they would call me director. They would just be like, "Director, what do you need?" And people would just instantly. So the downside of it, I mean, it's great because things got taken care of like that. The downside of it is, like, if my DP and I are like, "Oh, yeah, this shot's great, but there's that tree in it, what should we do?" "Well, maybe we can move the camera." And someone would hear us, and we'd turn around, and someone would be chopping the tree down. We'd be like, "Whoa, what's happening?" They're like, "You said you don't want the tree." We're like, "No, we didn't say chop." "Okay, it's too late. Tree's down." Or like there was like a guy cleaning the window, and we're on like the 5th floor, and one guy was like hanging out the window, and his friend was like, or the other guy was like holding his leg, and he was just like Spider-Man, like outside with one leg in, like cleaning the window on like the 5th floor. And my producer walked in, was just like, "No." And they're like, "It's China, we do this, it's okay." And she's like, "But we're responsible, this is an American production." So, and then, there was a lot of like catastrophes where, for example, we had a location locked, the hospital, and then a guy came on and just shut it down. And we had a permit. We were like, "This is the permit." And he was just like, "Okay, I'll just take this. I don't know what this is, but and we were like, "What's happening?" And everyone was just screaming at each other in Chinese, and we don't know who didn't pay off who. Like something happened, and we just got locked in the hospital for 8 hours while they tried to confiscate our footage with cops and all this stuff. We had just no idea what was going on. And then somehow it all worked. Like, we lost that day, but then we came back, like, next week. And they were like, "Yeah, that was just a jerk. He just wanted to mess with us." And we're like, "Okay, but we lost a day that we will never get back." So there was a lot of stuff like that.
On that note, we're going to open it to audience questions. Right here, there should be a mic coming.
Hi, thank you so much. And I had a friend who left early, wanted to tell you that happy thank you. Based on your Twitter or something.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Talk to me after, yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for the movie. I lived in China for a long time, so that really spoke to me. And I think my question is, so during the wedding scene, there was so much emotions, and my friends and I were all crying and laughing all at the same time. When did you know that you had that effect? When you were writing the script, or or on set, or you had your rough cut? When did you know that you had that emotional impact on the audience?
I don't think I knew I had that, like that was my intention for myself, I guess, but I didn't know I had that impact until we actually screened the film for a large audience. And we had done test screenings, and, you know, we got laughter here and, you know, tears other places, but we had only screened early cuts. Like the last 2 months of editing, we didn't do any test audience or anything. So it was, you know, a really wonderful surprise. But I think it's also my instinct, like why I wanted to make this movie was because as I was going through the experience, it was always like, and whenever I'm with my family, I never know if I should laugh or cry, you know? I'm just like so frustrated, but then like the next second I'll just start laughing. And so that was one of the main reasons why I wanted to make this film, was to capture the proximity of the grief and the humor.
Hi, okay, first of all, I just really want to say congratulations and thank you so much for this film. Like, as an Asian American myself, it's like, it's so surprising that I don't see this kind of representation, and it wasn't until I saw your film that I was like, wow, I've never seen anything like this before. So, and also just like, even though it was in Chinese, like, I heard like a lot of crying, a lot of laughter, and I'm sure like, the story just reaches everyone no matter where you're from. So thank you for that. And I guess what I wanted to ask is, I am in film and I really want to be a director. That is my goal. But as an Asian American woman, I'm sure you know, like, that is difficult in Hollywood, in the industry. So I just wanted to ask, like, going into all these pitch meetings and stuff like that, or like being on set, like, did you feel that you had to have a certain amount of like authority? And like, if you did, like, how did you combat that?
Have to have a authority, like, in order to get my stories told, you mean, or?
Yeah, just to get what you wanted.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, like, when I started making films, I didn't necessarily even think about being, like, a woman or Asian American. In many ways, I'm sure from the outside, if I, like, look at myself, I think the statistics are really bad, right? And it's really discouraging. But I think that what, like, allowed me to make films was just to, like, really have, like, know the stories that you want to tell, and don't compromise. You know, there have been times where I've compromised and I've regretted it. And so with this film, like, the one thing I'll say is I said no more than I said yes, and which is really difficult when you are a woman, when you are, like, a minority and you feel like you're never going to get those opportunities. And so when someone just hands you something, you just want to say yes, because out of desperation. But because this is my second film, and because it's such a personal story to me, I was like, I'd rather not make the film if I can't make it the right way. And I put it aside and I said, and actually when I did This American Life, it was such a pure experience that after, it was like 10 o'clock at night in New York, I recorded it, and then I went out to dinner with my friend afterwards. And like, we were sitting at the sushi restaurant that we've been going to since we were in college, and I just started crying. And he's like, but you just did this amazing thing. Why are you so sad? And I was like, because I've never experienced a storytelling experience that's so pure. That to have people ask me about my experience, what that's like, as opposed to them, like, taking it and trying to Hollywoodize it and, like, market it. And I was like, I don't think I'm ever going to have that experience as a filmmaker, not in this industry, not with the amount of money that it takes to make films. And I think that I want to go work for This American Life. Or something like that. And so I had put the film idea aside. I didn't think producers were going to call, and I had actually wanted to write it as a short story and publish it, or just find other ways to tell that story. And that's how I held on to, like, I think, like, my instincts and my, like, the purity of it. And then when the producers came, I had people offering, like, much bigger budgets for the film because they heard it on This American Life and it was now IP. And I said no. I said no to the Disney version. I said no to the, like, big budget version that was going to be the big fat Chinese wedding version where she's the bride and she brings home her boyfriend that they broke up but they're gonna get married anyway. Like, you know, that was the version people were pitching me. And I was like, but did you even hear my story? And so I think that's where you find your power, is just like do what feels good to you, know the stories that you want to tell, and find a way to tell it in a way that feels right to you.
There's one right here. Yeah, in the orange sweatshirt.
Hi. I was just wondering, because the last scene was really powerful. I was wondering what your thoughts were in choosing that, specifically like the imagery with the birds. And I don't know if I just made that up, but it seemed like there was some symbolism there, and it just was really interesting.
Yeah, well, for a long time, like, you know, everyone wanted it to end with, like, the knowledge that Nai is still alive, and to me, that wasn't part of the movie. I wanted it to, you know, be a postscript, because the story for me was never about whether she lives or dies. Like, that's the Hollywood version, right, of like, oh, and then she has a wedding and now she can attend. It was about something more spiritual than that. And so for me, it was about the fact that, you know, as immigrants, we leave. Like, you can't stay. You can't just move as much as you want to, like move back to China and live with your grandma. And you have to go back to your own life, and how do you do that? And so, you know, her doing that exercise on the streets of New York and having her voice transcend, you know, an echo into China was sort of my way of representing the fact that she carries her grandmother's spirit with her no matter where she goes, and that her voice through art in her life, it carries and resonates and it you know, contains the voice of her grandmother, and is heard globally, even in China.
Hi. It was a really beautiful movie, and part of that was the music. So what kind of choices went into choosing that music?
Yeah, most of it was score. I mean, there was a couple songs, like the very last one was a Leonard Cohen song that I've had from the very beginning, and we ended up, but Leonard Cohen felt like the wrong person to sing it for the story, so we had a woman cover it. But, you know, the lyrics being come healing of the body, come healing of the mind, the connection between body and spirit. And then the rest, a lot of it is score. Alex Weston did an incredible job. We took this idea of voices as the foundation. We wanted to do classical music, but I wanted it to be a vocal score, as a way to represent the voices of the family and of the community, versus that solo voice that you hear throughout as a representation of, like, Billy's voice on her own. And so the juxtaposition of her with a classical choir was part of the concept.
I think we have time for a couple more. Right here in the, yeah.
Hi, is there a superstition or symbol attached to the bird who keeps appearing in Billy's room?
I think I've read that before, you know, that it signifies death or whatever, but it's not why I put it in the film. I put it because, you know, I think to me it represents perspective. Like, so many weird coincidences happen all around us all the time if you look for them. And certainly for me, and some of them, like, are hard to explain because you're like, there's a bird, but I just saw the bird. You know, people would look at you crazy, but you know, like, that's strange. It's like the same bird. But I think it sort of represents the fact that if you read into it, if you take meaning from it, then it's meaningful. If you see no meaning in it, you're just like, it's another bird, then there's no meaning. And that's sort of what the whole movie is about. It's sort of perspective and belief. And if you believe something works, then maybe it does.
Last question in the very back.
Sorry. Hi. Great film. Have a lot of emotions about it that I will get into. But the thing that I'm interested in is what's it? It's kind of like two-part. What's it like writing and directing a character that I assume is playing your own experience, and like just writing for a character that's supposed to be playing you? And second, like, did you gain more perspective, like, looking back on the entire experience and then making a film out of it? Like, did that change how you felt about the whole thing? Or?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I did a lot of research for This American Life, and then also while doing the film, Little Nai Nai, playing herself, was on set all the time, so everyone got to ask her all kinds of questions. And then Tai Ma got to hang out with my dad, Diana Lynn, who plays mom, hung out with my mom, and so they all spent time together. And so oftentimes I would, after my parents left, I didn't let them come to set. They were just there for like pre-production. But then I would be on set with Tai, the actor dad, and Diana, actor mom, and then they would say something about my real parents that I never knew. And they would be like, "Oh, you didn't know that? Well, maybe I wasn't supposed to tell you." I was like, "What?" And so there was a lot of like meta, you know, and so I learned a lot, yeah, about not just the practice, but about my family. And in casting myself, I think it was funny because originally when Awkwafina was first brought up to me, I had not seen her movies because it was before Crazy Rich Asians and it was before Ocean's 8, and I only knew her through her music and her YouTube videos. So I was like, they were like, "Oh yeah, there's this girl Awkwafina," and I was like, "The girl who did my vag, like, that's who you want to play me? I don't understand how you see me." And they were like, "No, I mean Awkwafina's a character. Her real name's Nora Lum. You should meet with her." And I thought she was Korean, but it turns out her mother was Korean, but her mother passed away, and she was raised by her Chinese grandmother. And so when we actually met, she had that same question of like, how am I going to play the director? You know, is like, you know, who's directing me? And I was like, look, you're not playing me. Like, Billy is not me. Billy is a character who goes through the same experience that I went through. I'm trying to represent the experience, right? And the emotions, and not like me as a character or caricature. And in many ways, like, Billy is a character that's very different than who I am in real life. Like, first of all, I speak Chinese way better than Awkwafina. And so I had to, like, you know, sort of like taper the story, the film, for her language abilities. And so people kind of comment on the fact that her Chinese isn't very good. And I think it works really well for the movie, but that's not my reality. And yeah, and she has her own mannerisms, right? Like, Awkwafina does this thing where she like scrunches over her body, and for the first few days of shooting, all I wanted to do was like be like her mom and be like, straight, sit up straight. Like, it's not attractive. And then like the more that we did it, the more I was like, oh, that's like the character, you know? It is funny in a weird kind of way. Like, it has this sort of like sad but funny like posture to her. And so like we just rolled with it, and I was like, you know, I didn't tell her to do it, but I also didn't correct her. And so in many ways, like, this character just kind of formed where she's just like kind of mopey and we dressed her in these silhouettes of like all black, which I don't dress like that, you know, but it kind of stood out against the colorful costumes of the rest of the family. And she sort of reminds me of that black cartoon cat, you know, that's just kind of like, or like Eeyore from, I don't know if she'd be flattered to hear this, but like in a loving way, right? Just like she's so mopey all the time. And I'm not that mopey, and so, but you know, it's like, well, when I had the same concern before directing the film of how I was going to approach it, but then once you're on set, you approach it the same way you approach any film, where you go, what works best for the film, and you shift around the ingredients that you have to make the best meal you can, and as opposed to trying to force it to be something else.
All right, we'll give one more round of applause to Lulu Wang.
Thank you.
The movie comes out on, was it July 12th? So you have plenty of time to tell your friends to watch it.
And then go and watch it several more times in theaters when it comes out.
Please go out to support. It makes a huge difference.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.